All right. Welcome to another episode of Failure Decoded. You have Rachel and Shamsiya here, and we have a special guest today. But before we dive in, I just want to ask about the fact that you've been to every single country in the world. Like that, you must be so fun to talk to at cocktail parties because I mean, that's just the endless stories. Like, how did you manage that?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. How did I manage it? It was an 11-year project. I mean, it was something I worked on for 11 years, not full time, but off and on for 11 years. I was an aid worker for several years in West Africa. So I kind of got started by living in Sierra Leone and Liberia and traveling in some parts of the world that a lot of Americans don't get to. And then out of that process, I just developed a love for travel. And then I've also been a big goal setter and list maker. I always had my list every day of various things. And so at some point I made a list of all the countries I had been to. And I was like, wow, this is cool. Maybe I should try to get to 100 countries. That was the first goal. And then as I got closer to that goal, I realized that was kind of easy because there's 193 countries in the world. If you just go to half of them, you can kind of pick and choose, and if something's difficult somewhere, you just don't go there. And so I realized the real goal would be to get to every country. And so kind of made that my focus and just started working on it. It was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure you learned so much about I know we talk about failure specifically, but I'm sure when you experience so many different cultures, I can only imagine even just how people perceive things differently. So yeah, that's super cool. And I'm sure it will come up more in this conversation today.
I have something to add here.
Please.
It's very rare that you get to meet someone who's traveled literally every country on this beautiful planet Earth, right? And I was thinking, what kind of a Yoda, kind of an aura this person's going to carry. And yesterday when I was researching you, I found this line that you said, I've gone to so many countries now, I know I can figure it out. And and that just summed it up for me. It's like the confidence that now you have, that you can figure it out. And it just made me feel that it's invaluable experience that you carry, right?
Oh yeah, well thank you for saying that. I think the context there is going to lots of places helped me to understand, because I used to always be a big planner. I still like planning, right? But with going to every country or lots of different things you undertake in life, you don't always know exactly what the outcomes are going to be, or things come up along the way that you have to kind of navigate that are not part of the plan. And one of the greatest lessons of doing all the travel was realizing that sometimes things are going to go wrong, and it's not necessarily my objective to prevent those things from going wrong, because that would be impossible. But it's really my objective to figure out, what do I do in those situations? And so gaining the confidence to the belief in myself that, okay, I can figure things out, as you said. That to me was one of the greatest things. But I wouldn't have had that had I not decided to go to the 100 countries and then decided to go to all of them. So it's interesting that you gain that confidence by trying something, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be going to every country. Obviously, it could be any kind of business project or any kind of personal goal. Just learning that you can navigate whatever comes your way and make different decisions and such. It feels very empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that would be enough for someone to live the entire life by, but you haven't stopped. You are an entrepreneur, you are a podcast host, you are a speaker, and of course, a community builder, and of course, a travel blogger. So just tell us something that we should learn from you, for sure now.
Tell you something you should learn from me. I have no idea what you should learn from me. I haven't been very strategic in my life. I've been intentional, but not strategic, in the sense that, you mentioned community building, a lot of that came up along the way. I started this blog, The Art of Nonconformity, in 2008, and it was originally designed to chronicle, okay, here is my quest to go to every country. So I thought it would be mostly like a travel blog. And what I learned pretty quickly, within a few months, I was doing some meetups. I did a big meetup in Portland, Oregon, and then one in New York City. And I just noticed that the people who were coming out, they were so different than what I expected. I mean, a lot of them were interested in travel, and they were planning their own trips and such, but they were different ages and backgrounds and such, and about half men and half women. And they kind of saw the world differently. And so what I kind of realized was like, oh, they're connecting with the blog, not just because of the travel, but because of this community interest, or maybe they feel excluded in some way, and their friends or family don't always understand what they want to do or what they want to accomplish, or if they want to work for themselves and nobody else in their family has ever been an entrepreneur or been self-employed. So the community part came about, by like paying attention to that and kind of following that and realizing, oh, this is so much more than just travel. So in terms of what anyone can learn from me, I have just, for 12 years been responding to that in different ways, responding to how people connect with different things. And so, the original blog led to like the series of books. And then I started a podcast about side hustles because so many people were interested in that. I just finished a book tour for the newest book. And, all along the way, it's just about building relationships with people and reconnecting with people that I haven't seen for a long time. So my whole career is kind of a response, or it's like a little bit of a dialogue and response, because I'm creating too, but it's a dialogue and response based on what I have to offer and what other people connect with and how they choose to engage.
Yeah, it's interesting about the non-conformity kind of element and finding community in that, because I do feel like there are a lot of people out there that don't necessarily want a traditional path, but you kind of said it yourself, like when you don't have role models in your life to look to and you're the only one, you probably feel like, it's like, why am I a freak? Like, why don't I just want what everyone else wants? And like, how did you navigate that in your personal life? Like, did you have friends and family thinking like, what the heck is Chris doing? Just traveling the world, doing all this stuff? Like, was it hard at the beginning, or is it just part of who you are?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think sometimes people feel like they're a freak. Other times they know they're not a freak. They know this is right for them, but they still feel isolated. Because, as you said, they don't have peers, or they don't have role models. I do think it's a lot easier now because it is increasingly accepted for people to make different choices, and it's easier to find community online and such. But still, it's always a challenge. As for me, I feel like I was kind of fortunate in some ways. Some things were difficult for me as a kid. I lived in lots of different places. My parents were split up, and my mom had married somebody in the American Air Force, so we lived out of the country for a number of years, and then lots of different places in the U.S. So that wasn't always great for me as a kid, but I think long term it was probably helpful to me. And then I didn't really go to high school. Like, I went to 1-year high school and I dropped out. I was a juvenile delinquent. I had like a little troubled, adolescence and such. So also not the greatest experience at the time, but I'd always been kind of doing my own thing, for better or worse. Eventually it turned into better. And I had worked for myself as an adult from age 19, doing all kinds of different entrepreneurial ventures. And so I never really knew another way. Like, I never left a corporate job. I never had to navigate that process of okay, I've had a very traditional life. Now I'm going to embrace nonconformity. For me, it was kind of like, this is the way. And why would you want anything else? Why would I, for me, it's the safe conservative choice to work for myself. I never saw it as risky. For me, the risk would be trying to go and work for a bank or something, that wouldn't go very well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And sometimes people wonder are entrepreneurs born or made? I think there is. I think it can be both, but I do think some people are just destined to follow their own path. There just is no other way. So that's super interesting. And I'm wondering, is that how you came up with your side hustle school and your framework of starting by just working 30 minutes a day? Is that kind of how you came up with it, just from your own experience?
Maybe a little bit, and also just from paying attention. A lot of my entrepreneurial work is for people who don't connect with the Silicon Valley model. The $100 Startup is a book I wrote kind of out of the experience of touring America and going lots of places that were not just big cities, but hearing from all kinds of people who are I don't necessarily think of myself as a capital E entrepreneur, but there's a skill that I have, there's a talent I have that I wouldn't be able to make money for myself or my family, or be able to do something different or do something creative. And so I felt like nobody was really speaking to those people, at least broadly speaking. And so that's how $100 Startup came to be. And I'm not on a mission to create entrepreneurs necessarily. I think there's lots of ways to live a purposeful life, but I do think that everyone should learn to think entrepreneurially. And you can do that, in a career. You can do that in a traditional job or a hybrid kind of situation. And I also think it's really important for everyone to have more than one source of income. So I think that's where like Side Hustle School came from. There was a lot of dialogue about side hustles, going back, like I started the podcast 7 years ago. The book came out, Side Hustle, also 7 years ago. And around that time, people were using this phrase a lot, but a lot of them were using it to refer to like low paid work or like gig economy work, like driving for Uber or Lyft or whatever. And what I'm trying to do with the podcast, in the book, it's all about helping people actually like create an asset for themselves, something that's going to generate real income and could potentially change their whole life and such. And so I was like, I want to kind of re-engineer that conversation a little bit to help people think differently about it. And so then when I started the podcast, I felt like I was like, I feel like I'm late to the podcast world. Everybody's doing a podcast for a long time. That's just how I felt when I started my blog. Also, it's like you're never too late. That's like a whole side note. But when I started the podcast, it was like, what can I do differently? And so the answer I had was like, okay, I'm going to tell stories. I'm not going to do an interview format for my podcast. I want to tell stories and I want to make it like very action oriented, and I'm going to do it every day. So that's how that started. And that started January 1, 2017. And I've been doing it every day since. So I think we're on 2,470 or so right now.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. I will say, because Shamsiya and I just started last year, and like podcasting is definitely, I think it's more work than people think.
Oh, sure. Of course.
It's like,
it's a lot of work.
Yeah. I feel like content creation is such a treadmill. So like kudos to you for sticking with it for 7 years every day. That truly is like a very, very incredible feat.
Thank you. I will say one trick is, for anybody out there who has ADD or is neurodivergent, doing it every day is easier than doing it 2 or 3 days a week.
Interesting.
If I were to do it like a normal podcast, I would probably struggle. But because I have to do it every day, then it gets done. But if I took days off, that would not be good for me. It's easier to keep going than it is to quit.
Do you have a team to help you with the production and ideas, or is just you answering your questions and bringing it to people?
There's a team. There's some. I mean, it's a small team. Like I mostly work by myself and with a few people. But I have a great producer, so he does the audio editing and such. I don't want to do that myself. I wouldn't be very good at it. And then I have an assistant that helps with some things, but it's really mostly me. And with book publishing, like there's the publisher has various people and such. But I don't want to have a big team. I don't want to be a manager. It's not what I'm good at.
Yeah, fair. I'm curious to know if you could, because we also do like to provide actionable tips and advice for our listeners. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if someone wants to not just quit their job and like start this huge big business, but do as you say, like start for 30 minutes a day on work on an idea. Like, what's your advice for evaluating an idea? Because like ideas are kind of like a dime a dozen, right? It's like you can come up with 100 things, but like how do you actually pick something that is not only just like sustainable for you as a person, you enjoy it, but like that makes money? Because obviously you also need to like provide a lifestyle for yourself. So how would someone start?
Great. I always encourage people to focus first on their skills instead of their passion. So often people are like, well, what do I like to do? Let me make a list of things I like to do. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's more helpful to say, okay, what am I good at? What do I know about? What are my specific skills? What are my specific talents? What are the areas of knowledge that I have? And if you just write down a few things, you're probably missing a lot. So go a little bit deeper and don't just think about your formal education. Like you can start with that. You can start with your career and the jobs that you've had, but often your side hustle is going to come from something else. So it could be something that your friends often ask you about. Like think about the topics. There's probably something that your friends are always coming to you for, and that's a good clue. And it could be some type of knowledge that might seem kind of random to you. That's also a good clue. A lot of the side hustles I've looked at just doing really interesting or funny or kind of quirky things, but they've been able to make a lot of money with it. So focusing on skills first, and there's more to be said about that, but that's the short version of it. And then secondly, going from idea to offer, because as you said very well, ideas are a dime a dozen. Like, it's not that difficult to learn the skill of coming up with ideas. And there's lots of other ideas out there for the taking. So I think there's no real proprietary value in ideas. The idea is in the values in the execution, the implementation. So instead of thinking about ideas, think about offers. What does this look like as a product or a service? What are people actually paying for? Like, what is the pitch for that? And start thinking about that on the front end, not like at the very end of all the rest of the process. Like, if you're like, here's my idea to provide this kind of service. I'm going to help edit podcasts. Okay, what does that look like as a specific offer? How much does it cost? What are the deliverables? What is the marketing plan? All that kind of stuff. So the side hustle book that has the 30-minute kind of format very much followed that kind of thinking of like, do this, do this, do this.
Perfect. I need to add here. So that's
please.
how I came across.
Oh, look at this. That's fun. There's 100 ideas there. You can take the ideas in that book.
This is the book all entrepreneurs should have with them. And this is the book that they should read like the Bible. Honestly, it's written so beautifully well. I wouldn't even call it a book. It's a guide with real life case studies of regular people who have built businesses. Honestly, with everything that you do and all the books you have written and all the talks that you talk, the underlying theme is how inspiration is good, but action is even better.
Great.
And this book is written that way. The vignettes and everything that you talk about, how you need to identify your skills and how you need to use them to create tangible skills into businesses, something that I need to work on, and I'm taking that seriously from you. So this is, it's not paid advertisement, but this is beautiful.
No paid endorsement. No. This is a free organic testimonial. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I wish I could write a book like this someday. And
I hope you will. I hope you will write a book like this someday. I hope you write your own book that will be better than mine. That's great.
And Rachel and I want to do it together. So hopefully that will be together.
Great. I love it.
Yes.
It's fun.
I feel like this is a good segue into perhaps the failure topic, because that's kind of the thing that Shamsiya and I are always very keen to understand. And that's the kind of the thing that we're trying to dive deep on and get insights from people like yourself who've had lots of life experience, done many different things. Failure is obviously a big part of life. So is there any particular moment that you could share with us where you've really learned from an experience in which you failed?
Yeah, well, thank you for raising that, and thank you for doing the work. Well, thank you for asking. I'm so glad you're doing this work about failure, because I do think it is an underappreciated topic. On the podcast, I have this segment called Failure Friday, where we're always looking at like small business disasters and mistakes and such. And part of the reason I started that format is because like I'm always telling case studies and like success stories and like, here's all these amazing things and this person made a lot of money. But it's also good to like look at the other side of it. So I was trying to think for me, we could talk for a very long time about my failures and things that haven't gone well and a lot of travel stuff. We were talking about that briefly in the beginning. But if I think about a more like businessy one, kind of combined business and travel, when I was living in West Africa, this is actually before I started the blog, I was running this business with a fulfillment center in the States. So this fulfillment center was like sending out product, and I was just managing this as like an e-commerce business from afar. Like nobody knew that I was living in Sierra Leone on a hospital ship. And so I was very dependent on this fulfillment center because like I wasn't there. And then I noticed that over like a course of a couple of weeks, they were less than responsive, and like it seemed like things weren't being sent out properly, or they were going out late or whatever. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I just kind of ignored it because I was like, what can I do? Also, I tend to ignore things, strategically, which doesn't always work well. And then one day I just get a note from them. They wrote to like all their customers that said basically like, we're shutting down the business, and not just are we shutting down, but we actually shut down 2 weeks ago effectively. And like nothing has gone out, and nothing more will go out, and sorry about that, that kind of thing. And so there I am like thousands of miles away, and I'm like, this is kind of the business I was trying to build next, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And so at first I felt very overwhelmed by it and disturbed. So I went for a walk, and I was kind of like, well, what next? Like, what can I do? And so eventually I kind of went into like action mode or response mode, and like, okay, I need another provider. Maybe somebody can step in and help me in the meantime, in the interim between finding another provider and such. And I need to communicate with customers and get my printer and organized and all these different things. But so I had to manage all these logistics and such. But simultaneous to the logistics, it's also like this emotional experience of like, okay, I feel, challenged, and I feel disappointed, a little bit angry. But also I began to feel, even then, we talked about confidence also in the beginning of this conversation. I began to feel this sense of confidence that like, I will get through this. And I'm not quite sure how, but I can see that one day, perhaps years from now on this podcast, I'm going to be reflecting back, and I'm going to be like, that was difficult. That was frustrating. I wish that didn't happen. But you know what? I got through it, and it was fine. Right. And I think the thing about failure is you don't wish it upon anyone. It's not like failure is like an aspirational quality. Like, I think success is better than failure. I think that's an important point to make. We don't want to glamorize failure too much. But because it is sometimes inevitable if we're taking risks, if we are doing something that's difficult, like if you never do anything difficult, maybe you won't fail, but that's boring. So if we accept that it's somewhat inevitable, then we have to also believe that we can get through it and see something that's on the other side. So that's one thing I think about when you ask me, like, what's a failure story?
That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And just like one follow-up to that, sorry, I can hear a little bit of feedback. I hope that doesn't record, but...
Yes, I think something happened in that little alert situation.
No worries.
Let's see here, if I can change something here. It says this can't be changed while uploading.
Recording, yeah.
Oh, we might be able to just edit it out after. Actually, I don't hear it as bad. Yeah, it's not as bad anymore. Sorry, we just had like the one last follow-up question, and then we'll fix all this. But yeah, just to follow up to that failure story, you mentioned going for a walk and just kind of reflecting. Like, is that your typical response when something bad happens? Because that's, I think, another good strategy for entrepreneurs to have, is just almost like some kind of framework or process for like decompressing after something happens, that they can always go back to and just like calm down and like look at it from a different perspective. Like, is going for a walk and reflecting kind of like your thing, or is there something else you'd recommend?
Sure. I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful to move a little bit, just to move your body and get some endorphins going and not just be like kind of stuck in a place. So I do try to do that. I do try to just like move a little bit, and even if it's just a short walk, just a little bit of a reset. It's part of like, it's the walk, but then as part of the walk, it's like, what am I in control of here? What do I have control in this situation? Because it's very easy to get upset and essentially sidetracked by things that are not within your control. And that doesn't mean that other things are okay. It's like you can still feel angry or hurt or, all kinds of things. But I try to not worry about things that I can't control. And so the reset and the walk, or whatever it is a little bit like, all right, what can I actually do here? And I've got a limited range of options, most likely. So that makes it easy. There's only a few things I can do. So I need to focus on those things and not all the things I cannot do.
Yeah.
That's excellent mindset advice. I mean, I wish everyone would come to that, and that you just made it sound very easy, and it's not, but we should all try to get to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like you said something like, you focus on what's right in front of you, because otherwise you'll get overwhelmed. I feel like I saw you post that on LinkedIn. It's just to really focus on that. So that's great advice. So with that being said, where can people find you? I know you have books and your podcast. Where can people start? You have your own personal website. We'll link in the show notes, but like, what's the top 2 places you'd recommend people check you out?
Sure. Thank you. The podcast is Side Hustle School. You can listen to that anywhere. Website is chrisguillebeau.com, or just search The Art of Nonconformity. And then on Instagram, I'm 193 countries.
Awesome.
Yes.
Full circle, back to the travel.
That's right.
That's right. All right. Thank you so much for your time today, Chris. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Enjoyed talking to us.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it very much. Shamsiya, Rachel, thank you. Best of luck with everything. I love the podcast. I'm a big fan. So let me know what I can do.